connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is self-love. We've been talking about love and intimacy this week. So now we get to talk about self-love. But before we get started, let's just take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs and flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells and your organs, bringing vital life energy throughout your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, energizing, electrifying all your molecules, all your electrons, lighting your cells up from the inside out. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining stress, tension, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently take our palms and press them gently together. Softly, softly rub your fingers against your palms to feel the deliciousness of that sensation, the tickling, the tingling, the softness, and allow yourselves to become present right here, right now. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So self-love. As we think about self-love, it makes me wonder, is self-love an attitude or a feeling? Do we, when we think of ourselves, have this overwhelming feeling of appreciation and love and connection? Or is self-love really an expression in behaviors, in our tolerance of ourselves, of our behaviors, of forgiveness for ourselves, of understanding and compassion toward ourselves? Is there a distinction? Got lots of questions this morning. Is there a distinction between acting loving toward oneself versus loving oneself? You know, acting in a loving way, is that distinct from self-love? And I wonder if that even matters. Does it matter that, does it matter if we are demonstrating loving practices toward ourselves, compassion, forgiveness, understanding, patience, tolerance? If we're behaving in that way toward ourselves, does it matter if we have this feeling of self-love? So is it an emotion? I'm curious what you think about this and what your experience is of self-love. How does that show itself in your life when we have the ability to be loving toward ourselves? And then another question, like I said, I have quite a few of them today. Another question is there a distinction between, like, when we have loving behaviors toward ourselves and when we don't? You know, there may be moments when we catch ourselves in behaviors that are not compassionate, that are not kind to ourselves, and then we can reconnect to self-love or self-appreciation or being loving toward ourselves, and allow ourselves to find forgiveness for those patterns. So I guess the question is self-love a constant state? And another question is, when we are being loved, perhaps the whole issue or conversation of self-love just evaporates. Maybe it dissolves into something else. Maybe it becomes a non-issue because we are just being present in love, as love. And for some of us, that may be a rarer occurrence, but I am thinking about this because when we confront challenges in life, and actually forget about that even. So many of us are steeped in self-hatred and self-criticism and self-punishing. And I'm looking at what it takes to move from that place of self-punishment into being loving. And, on one level, I think we can say it's a choice. On another level, it's a matter of how do we get to that place where we have the capacity to exercise that choice. And it's very interesting to me to see how deeply down a rabbit hole we can go, a rabbit hole of despair and disconnection from self, like disconnection from our core beingness. And when that occurs, how profoundly we can really spin out into terrifying places. And I'm not seeing any of your comments. If you're here and you're commenting, I'm not seeing them, and that's why I'm not responding. So if you are here, it would be great. I'd so appreciate it if you just chime in and say hello, so that I know that all things are working. Looks like it's working on Facebook. Looks like it was working on Restream. But again, I haven't seen any comments from you guys, so I'm not sure what's up. Anyway, there we go. Andrea, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Thanks for chiming in, and all is good in the streaming media world at the moment. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. Anyway, we're talking about self-love, and I think in a conversation about self-love, we also get to look at self-hatred and self-punishment, and how do we go about turning it around? Thank you, Hope. Hope says we are here, M&M. That's for me and Maggie, Mira and Maggie, in case you haven't tuned in before. And thank you so much for being here, Hope. It's great to have you. And of course, it's great to have you too, Andrea. I don't know if I said that. And everybody who's joining us. So I think that this issue of self-love, if we were able to be loving toward ourselves, if we were able to recognize that people might actually love us, and if we, regardless of whether other people love us, that we love ourselves, that it would be a very different world. And I've recently had occasion to interact with some folks who were very, 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 very challenged by self-love, or actually self-hatred, and such a complete lack of self-connection and self-appreciation and approval and acceptance, that they just were spinning into really terrifying areas. And good morning, Dennis. It's so good to have you here. Welcome. And I think that when we're disconnected from self, when we're not able to cultivate a positive and strong relationship with ourselves, then we engage in behaviors that are damaging to self and damaging to others potentially as well. And there's such a deep out of that disconnection with self, there's such a deep despair. And I like I said, what I'm looking at is how do we make that migration from that deep place of despair and separation from self and from others as a consequence. I don't think we can. I think we connect with others to the degree that we're able to connect with ourselves. Connect authentically with others to the degree that we're able to connect with ourselves. And I'm wondering what kind of formula, what does it take to move from this deep sense of self-hatred to compassion. And I wonder, so many of us treat others better than we would treat ourselves, or than we treat ourselves. And I wonder, I said earlier that we can love others only to the capacity that we have for loving ourselves. And yet I think we can maybe train ourselves into self-love through being able to find compassion for others. I mean, it's interesting because I think there's it's a weird dynamic as I'm thinking of it, that we can have greater compassion oftentimes for others than for ourselves. Why is that? We're less critical of others typically than we are of ourselves, but also the criticisms that we have on ourselves, we levy on others as well. It's so interesting. I'm just in a bit of a conundrum about it, because my thinking is that if we can allow ourselves to connect inside, if we can calm ourselves to connect deeply to our hearts, that is the beginning of self-love. If we can bypass the barrage of criticism and story to get to this place of maybe a moment's quiet, maybe a moment's peace inside ourselves, perhaps through the breath, where we can find a place of calm. And yet I've experienced people experiencing that there is no place of calm, that they can't find access to it, even by slowing the breath, that there's not the ability to slow down all of the negative noise. And I think that having come from a place of deep self-hatred in the past, I'm looking to see if I can recognize what it was that allowed for the transition. And I don't think it was an overnight transition, but I think that there is a practice of compassion that we can cultivate to the word tolerance comes in, and not just to have tolerance for our failings, quote unquote failings, the judgments that we place on ourselves, but to have a level of tolerance for our emotions, to be able to tolerate, to be able to experience a level of emotional intensity. So I do remember, actually, now that I'm speaking of it, what it took for me to be moving from self-hatred was to be willing to move through the judgment and the shame. I had such profound shame and guilt. And what I recall now is that I allowed myself the grace to truly experience, like to not resist the shame, to, instead of trying to fend it off and stave it off and keep it at arm's length, or deny it, or keep it buried, I allowed myself to experience it and to face those feelings. And it was excruciating. I can say that it was excruciating to be feeling that depth of shame and disappointment and judgment and despair that was attendant with it. And yet, as I was allowing myself to experience it, I was able to move through it. Like it dissipated over time. The shame dissolved by shining a light on it, by allowing myself to be present to it. And this is so much of the core connection work that I do, where we allow ourselves to be present to these intense emotions. The thing is that sometimes knowing the intensity of the emotion, we get terrified. And in our terror, we build more resistance and avoidance and any kind of behavior that can quell the feeling, that can numb it or derail it, to stop it in any way, something maybe physical that numbs that pain or overcomes it, so that we get a respite from the onslaught of the intensity of those emotions. And I was speaking with a friend, and I was talking about how there can be this terror around experiencing our emotions, and they said that was an experience that they had a similar fear. And the thing is, I think that fear comes from entertaining the possibility that we could get so lost in the emotions that we would never come out. And I think that there were times in my life that I felt that if I started crying, I would never stop. And some of us have had feelings like that fear that we would end up being committed because the emotions were so intense and we wouldn't be able to handle it. And I certainly had that fear in my life too, that I would just lose it and go crazy and end up institutionalized. And so I'm familiar with the fear, and yet I believe that the only way past it is through it. And it doesn't mean necessarily reliving the drama and the trauma, but it does mean moving the emotion, the energy that may have been crystallized in those moments of drama and trauma, or moments of despair. And if we can recognize that emotion is energy in motion, that we can allow ourselves perhaps to more freely allow that energy to move. And also we can do so without attaching meaning, where emotion, like sadness is sadness. We don't necessarily have to have a reason for it. Anger is anger. We don't necessarily have to have a reason for it. And we can experience the anger, and then we can look at what was the trigger And then as we're able to explore the trigger, that might allow us to find inroads into diffusing that trigger in the future, perhaps. But the emotion itself is energy. And I think it is a profound act of self-love and tremendous courage to find a way to face our deepest emotions, to allow them to experience them. And it may mean finding a safe place to do that. It may mean finding someone that can be there to just be present for you, to remind you that you're here right now, that you're not falling back into that pit. Yeah, so that can be a support and a help. So Elaine says, thank you, Elaine, for chiming in. To love ourselves as we are, right where we are in the moment, by accepting where we are and forgive ourselves when we judge ourselves so harshly. It's a process to heal or let go of the programs of self-abuse inside and outside, to truly feel compassion and forgiveness for ourselves and free ourselves from the beliefs from outside sources and our own. This process takes gentle kindness, the willingness to be compassionate and patient with ourselves and others as we remember the love that we truly are. Beautifully said, Elaine, and I agree 100% that we get to feel kindness and compassion for ourselves. And yet I've witnessed people who are so deeply enmeshed in the self-hatred that there is no access, that they are not finding access to self-compassion or kindness or forgiveness or acceptance. And so what I recognize is, for me anyway, one of the practices that allowed me to move into deeper acceptance of myself was when I stopped resisting and avoiding the underlying feelings of guilt and shame that I had. And I allowed myself, instead of resisting it, instead of running from it, instead of pretending it didn't exist or doing behaviors so that I wouldn't have to confront the way I felt, I finally just allowed myself to be present to the experience of those emotions over a period of time. And it was excruciating, as I said, to be face to face with that shame that was very much the source of, or the foundation of a lot of the self-hatred. And as I allowed myself to feel it, as with my experience with any emotion, when we allow ourselves to actually feel it, it does dissipate. The thing is that it does take courage to move into that space, without making the stories that we tell about those judgments and emotions, without making those stories true. And to allow for, that's my experience. Here I am presencing myself to my experience. And Elaine says, all that is ready to take this on will be given when they need to let go. No one is not guided to wake up and remember the resources are always there, even when we don't think so. Love is always there. I agree with you 100%, Elaine. And I'm talking about a situation where, although love was present, the person that I was interacting with had had no capacity to connect to that love. And what there was profound fear and resistance and fear of feeling the feelings and overwhelm by the intensity of those feelings and panic, really, when the experience of it was arising for them, and to the point where there was no real capacity in that moment to penetrate beyond that terror. And Elaine says, feeling is the only way through it. I agree. And can be very scary. So it can be paralyzing. It can be something that we avoid for years. It can be something that leads us to self-harming behaviors. It can be something that the fear of the feelings is as great or greater than the experience of the feelings themselves in many cases. And Elaine continues, feeling is the only way through it and can be very scary. But those that already will do whatever it takes to free themselves from the chains that bind them. And we don't all always, we're not always in that place to be able to do whatever it takes in that moment. And whatever it takes in that moment is like a trying to survive. And if the feelings feel life-threatening, then we might be mustering all our energies that we can find to avoid them at all costs if we think that they're going to destroy us. And so Elaine says, not yet, but things are not always as they perceive to be, love. Yes, I agree. I agree that things are not always as they appear. And I hope that in this case, that is the case. I do hope that perhaps they made room to let the light in. So thank you so much for your engagement, Elaine. Very, very deeply felt and beautifully expressed. And I want to thank you all for these conversations this week about love and letting love in and self-love and intimacy. And I think this is very rich territory. And I am so grateful to you for engaging as you do. And that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. I go live each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern and here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. Please join us and the other wonderful programming on Enlightened World Network. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. I have to jump. And so Alexandra, welcome. Shedding the layers is painful and we have to face our shadow side, but it requires courage, tremendous courage. And much love to all of you. Elaine, I'm sorry, I have to jump. So until next time, courage and love and cherish yourselves. Until